When my son got married, I kept the $95 million a secret because I wanted to see something. Not who would admire me, not who would envy me, just who would treat me like a man deserving of respect. My name is Samuel Washington. I'm 63 years old, and until last year, I believed I understood the people I loved. But grief and loss have a strange way of reshaping what you think you know. When my wife Lorraine died, I learned that love can hide secrets even when it's pure. Not secrets meant to deceive, but ones meant to protect. Lorraine and I were married nearly 4 decades. She was the kind of woman who made life feel warm, even when the world felt cold. We lived modestly. A simple house in Southeast DC, steady jobs and a quiet routine. I worked in hospital maintenance and she taught 3rd grade. We didn't have fancy vacations or expensive jewelry, but we had enough. We raised our son Marcus with love, discipline, and the belief that dignity comes from character, not bank accounts. Before I proceed, I want you to do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop your country in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening to me from. Thank you. Then came her cancer. Fast, merciless, and silent. The doctors said 3 months, and they were right. I held her hand through every appointment, every night of pain, every whispered goodbye. One of those nights, with her voice barely above a breath, she told me about a key hidden under the velvet lining in her jewelry box. She didn't explain why, she just said, "When I'm gone, you'll know what to do." After the funeral, when the world had finally gone quiet enough to hear my own breathing, I went to the bank. I expected to find old certificates and sentimental papers. What I found instead was an envelope full of documents I'd never seen. Trust accounts, property deeds, investment reports. All in her maiden name. At the bottom of one sheet was a total written in her neat handwriting. 94,847,293,17. I had to blink at it for minutes before it made sense. Lorraine, my sweet, careful, humble Lorraine, had been a millionaire for almost 30 years. She had inherited wealth from her family, but never used it, never mentioned it, never hinted at it. She watched me work overtime shifts and still never said a word. But I understood why. I have always been a proud man. I was raised to earn my keep, to take responsibility, to stand on my own feet. She knew if I had known about the money, I would have felt like our life no longer belonged to me. She protected my dignity. Even in her final act, she was loving me the best way she knew how. I didn't tell Marcus. He had just finished his residency and become a pediatric surgeon. He was finally standing on his own. If Lorraine had hidden the money so I could grow into the man I wanted to be, then I owed Marcus the same chance. A few months later, Marcus drove home with news that made him glow like a child on Christmas morning. He had met someone. Her name was Victoria, and he was going to propose. He spoke of her with a joy I remembered, from when he used to tell us about his dreams of being a doctor. I wanted to be happy for him. I really did. When I met Victoria, she was polite and poised like someone raised in wealth. She complimented the house, the meal, the photos, but there were tiny cracks in her politeness. The way her eyes lingered on the worn furniture. The faint tone she used when she said the word maintenance while asking about my job. It wasn't what she said. It was what she believed without realizing she believed it, that some people are higher and some are lower. Marcus didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't want to. Love can blur edges like that. Then I met her parents. Charles and Patricia Ashworth were the kind of rich who didn't flaunt. They just breathed money into the air and expected the room to adjust its temperature accordingly. Their smiles were polite, their voices smooth, their words carefully selected to imply superiority without ever stating it aloud. They made it clear that they were happy to welcome Marcus into their world, as though their world was the standard and ours was an introduction to proper living. Little by little, I watched something shift in Marcus. He apologized for where he came from without using the word. Sorry, he laughed nervously when his future in-laws made comments about different backgrounds. He talked less about the neighborhood where he grew up and more about the connections he was making through his new family. I saw him bending himself, smoothing his edges, trying to fit a mold that was never shaped for him. The wedding planning brought everything into the light. Seating charts placing me in the back. Conversations about making sure I was comfortable. Invitations distributed with the assumption that my modest circle would need to be controlled so they didn't disturb the atmosphere. All wrapped in smiles like lace curtains that couldn't hide the truth beneath them. The final insult came during a rehearsal dinner, when Patricia announced, with the grace of someone discussing charity work, that they hoped his side of the family would adjust well to the standards and expectations of their lifestyle. My own son stayed silent. That night, I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply knew. The wedding day arrived like a performance staged for the approval of powerful guests. I sat at the back, watching the ceremony through flickering candlelight, feeling like a stranger at my own child's celebration. When Patricia stood to give her speech, thanking everyone for supporting Victoria in choosing someone authentic and unspoiled, and expressing hope that Marcus's family would learn to grow into their world, something in me became steel. I stood. I walked to the front of the room. And I told the truth, not to impress, not to punish, but to reveal. I told them about the money, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. And the room changed. The faces, the posture, the eyes, everything shifted. But this is where the story only starts to turn. The silence in that room felt heavy, like the air had grown thick enough to hold shape. Eyes that once looked at me with polite dismissal now shone with stunned calculation. They were not shocked that I spoke. They were shocked that a man they assumed beneath them held power they never imagined. Money does not change character, but it certainly reveals it. I saw the shift immediately. Patricia's lips parted in a frozen smile, her eyes widening before she regained control. Charles straightened his posture, adjusting his cufflinks with the speed of someone preparing to renegotiate reality. And then there was Victoria, looking at Marcus, not with love or support, but with the sharp panic of someone realizing a prize was slipping from her grasp. Marcus stared at me, and in his face I saw a storm. Confusion, guilt, pride, anger, love, all tangled together. I raised my hand gently to show that this wasn't a performance, not anger, not accusation. I never said a word before now, I told him, my voice steady, because your mother wanted you to grow on your own strength, not someone else's. She wanted you to know who you were before the world tried to tell you who to be. The room was silent, but not listening, just waiting to see which side of the story would become the one they would follow. Victoria swallowed hard, then stepped toward Marcus and wrapped her nails around his arm. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me?" she asked with feigned softness, her voice trembling just enough to be believable to anyone who didn't know better. Marcus looked at her, and in that moment I could see him thinking, not with the panic of surprise, but with the sudden clarity of hindsight. Every comment, every gesture, every plan that placed his life behind the polished frame of her family. He saw it all at once, like a film reel flickering fast and cruel. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I never knew." Her expression flickered, only for a second, but it was enough. She wasn't disappointed for him. She was disappointed about what she hadn't gained sooner. Charles cleared his throat, smiling with that thin, brittle charm rich men use when they're trying to recover control. "Well, this certainly changes some dynamics." He laughed lightly. "I suppose we should all be pleased. A shared future is easier when both families have equal footing." I looked at him not unkindly, but with the clarity of a man who had seen enough masks to recognize one instantly. "There is no equal footing here," I said, "not because of money, not because of status, but because dignity is something that cannot be purchased and cannot be faked. The problem was never our circumstances. The problem was the assumption of superiority." His smile faded. I turned to Marcus. It was his face I cared about, not theirs, not the guests, not the ceremony. Just my son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the teenager I stood beside during late-night study sessions, the man I hugged when he finally wore his doctor's coat for the first time. "I love you. I always will," I said, "but I will not stand by quietly while you are reshaped into a version of yourself that someone else prefers. Your mother didn't raise you to trade your identity for acceptance." His eyes filled, not from embarrassment, but recognition. Victoria's voice rose, sharp and cracking. "So what are you trying to do, ruin this wedding, embarrass us?" "No," I replied softly. "I'm trying to save my son." The words settled like dust in sunlight. Marcus looked down at his hands. He said nothing for a long moment, then finally lifted his gaze toward the woman he was about to vow his life to. "Victoria," he said, his voice low, "did you ever love me for who I was, before today?" She stared at him, the answer in her silence, long before her words could form. She opened her mouth to speak, to mend, to justify, to redirect, but the performance was already visible. He stepped back, the slightest movement, but it said everything. The officiant, sensing the collapse of ceremony, quietly stepped away. Patricia began to protest, gentle, measured, defensive, but Marcus raised his hand just as I had before. He wasn't angry. He was awake. "I have spent months trying to make myself smaller to fit into this world," he said. "I thought that meant growth. I thought that meant maturity, but I see now it was erasure." Victoria's eyes glistened, but they weren't tears of love. They were tears of loss, loss of a future she had already planned, itemized, and budgeted. Charles stepped forward, his voice colder now. "Marcus, be reasonable. You are about to throw away stability, a powerful network, a legacy." Marcus looked at him, not with fear, but with something stronger. "My legacy does not come from a family name I married into," he said. "It comes from where I began. It comes from the values my parents gave me, and if I let that go, then I have nothing worth passing on." Silence again, but now it was listening. Marcus turned to me. His voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, I'm sorry." I shook my head. "There is nothing to be sorry for. You were learning. We all learn." He walked to Victoria and gently removed the ring from her hand. She made no move to stop him. Not because she accepted it, but because she understood that grasping for it now would reveal everything that had always been true. He handed the ring back. Guests murmured, some in sympathy, some in scandal. None of that mattered. The ceremony dissolved. Decorations stayed in place, candles still flickered, music still hummed through hidden speakers, but the performance had ended. The truth had stepped forward. Marcus and I walked outside together. The air was cool, the sky beginning to shift into evening. For a long time, we didn't speak. We just stood together, the way we had so many times before, two people who didn't need to fill silence to understand each other. Finally, he asked, "What do we do now?" I smiled, the first real smile I had felt in months. "We live," I said, "with dignity, with clarity, and with the memory of the person who taught us how." He nodded, and in that moment, I felt Lorraine with us, not as sorrow, not as absence, but as guidance. The quiet strength of her choices, the softness of her love, the legacy she left, not in money but in the men we had become. Marcus exhaled, long and steady, letting go of something that had weighed on him without his knowing. We got in the car, drove home, not to a mansion, not to a new identity, but to the place where love had always been real, and for the first time in a very long time, the future felt honest.